And now, I'd like to turn our attention to artificial intelligence, developing technology, genetics, the inflammation exposure, and other fascinating aspects of what is known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Everything about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, of course, greatly impacts the future of medicine, science, and research around the world. Here to present a detailed look at the rapidly changing landscape is Muratz Sönmez. He is the head of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution Network and a member of the managing board of the World Economic Forum. Please join me in welcoming Muratz Sönmez.
Good afternoon. I'd like to take us back, let's see if this slide works, 4,000 years, or 3,000 years actually, to a game called Go. It's an ancient Chinese game. It's a board game, as you see on the stage. It's 19 by 19. What's unique about this game is the number of games you can play on it. This is the number, and we'll have a quiz later on for you to see who memorized the whole thing. It is a big number. It's 2.08 times 10 to the power 172. How big is that number? It's a lot bigger than the atoms in the known universe, which is 10 to the power 70 or 72. So for a long time, this was the ultimate goal of artificial intelligence researchers, to learn how to play, to beat the grandmasters of this game. Chess was mastered in 1998 by IBM. They played against Kasparov. He won the first game. IBM won the second game. He wanted to play again. IBM was happy with the tie, and they unplugged the machines. But it had a lot fewer games to play. In March 2016, a machine learning engine called AlphaGo, developed by three guys in the UK, Demis, Mustafa, and Shane, beat the 18-time world champion Lee Sedol 4-1. This was a pivotal moment because, number one, it happened 10 to 20 years before experts thought it would happen. In fact, I asked one of our members of our Artificial Intelligence Council, he's a top AI researcher at UC Berkeley, I asked him, I said, how far did you think we were away from mastering Go before this happened? He said 10 to 20 years. So it happened ahead of schedule. Number two, it was the first time the machine insight surpassed human insight. Because Go is a game of insight, not intelligence. It's impossible for anyone, given the number of games you saw on the screen, for them to go through all of these permutations and come back and say this is the best move. So it's a game of insight. And number three, it had societal implications because this young man, Lee Sedol, who had been playing Go since age 3, was a role model for every Korean parent who had a young daughter or son, who told them, look, if you work hard, if you study hard, you have a shot at being Lee Sedol. Suddenly he was beaten by a machine. What do you do as a parent? What do you do as a teacher? What do you do as a society? What do you do if you're a university president? And as these technologies are evolving rapidly, it is really changing everything, as Bob mentioned. The way they mastered this game is very, very interesting. They looked at data from 100,000 games played online. So from a total population of 10 to the power of 172, they looked at 10 to the power of 5. And the machine itself developed its own algorithm, its method to play Go. To this date, we don't know why it made the moves it made. We know what it made, and we don't know why. In fact, in one of the games, I think it was game 3, it made a move that everybody said, oh, okay, it's going to lose the game. But that was a pivotal decision for the machine to win the game. When you play it backward, you know it, but when it's made, we didn't know. And that's called the black box problem in AI. It's called the transparency or lack of transparency of algorithms. So the algorithm is not written by a human being. It is derived from the data, from limited data, by the machine itself. And there's no way for us to know what it is. And there's a lot of research going into it called the black box AI problem or transparency of algorithms. In fact, Elon Musk started an initiative called OpenAI, which is now led by a young man He went to Stanford, but I shouldn't tell this to Bob, but he dropped out and started one of the most successful incubators, Y Combinator. And Sam Altman is running OpenAI, and Microsoft just invested $1 billion into it to accelerate the solution to the transparency of algorithms. This raises a number of questions about ethics. How do we know that the algorithm is ethical? Whose ethics? Who are we to tell each other? Who owns the intellectual capital to the algorithm? We are now seeing the shift from physical capital to intellectual capital to algorithmic capital. The algorithm gets better and better over time. Who owns the intellectual property to it? What happens if something goes wrong? Who's liable? These are unforeseen to date governance questions. And that's what we're doing at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution Network, is as these technologies are evolving rapidly at unprecedented speed and scale, the governance mechanisms, the rules and regulations and norms and ethics and legal system are falling way behind. And by the time we react to a single development, a new one has happened, and we always operate in this gray area called the too late zone. And there is also a danger that these developments will be taken advantage of by privileged few in the society. I'm not talking about mega millionaires. If you're wearing a wearable device, you're one of the privileged few. And the gap, as you know, has been widening in the last 40 years. And there's a real danger that these technologies will further exacerbate the division between the privileged few and the rest of the society. And as we know, and we have seen politically around the world, when people feel left behind, it's not morally right, it's not socially right, and it's not economically right. So our mission is to ensure that the fourth industrial revolution benefits everyone, not just a few. There's also another danger, which is a bit more systemic. Artificial intelligence needs data. It needs data from people, data from things, and in fact, by 2020, which is a few months out, there will be 20 billion things providing data. Embedded hearts and embedded devices, wearables, sensors, transformers, cars, drones, satellites. And we talk about the privacy of data, of individual data, but there's also a lot more data coming from things. And as we know in your field, if you can combine lifestyle data, environment data, and personal data, we may be able to accelerate the formulation of the solutions, some of the biggest challenges we have in medicine. The AlphaGo guys didn't stop there. That was 3 years ago. A year later, they introduced an engine called AlphaGo Zero. They just fed the rules of the game to it, and the engine played against itself, and in 3 days, generated enough data to make it to reach a level that beat the original engine 100 to 0 with self-generated data. In 40 days, it generated data that would have taken humanity hundreds of years and achieved what they call superhuman intelligence level. And in the words of one of the founders, Demis Hassabis, he says, quote, "We're no longer constrained by the limits of human knowledge," end quote. This is from him, and this represents enormous opportunities as well as challenges. When you think about this and scientific method, does it put scientific method on steroids, or does it provide an alternative mechanism? And these are questions to be discussed. It's not just in artificial intelligence. You're seeing that in genetic engineering, in synthetic biology, in medicine, as well as in physical technologies like the drones. And this drone that I'm holding in my hand was one of the first 10 drones flown in Rwanda to deliver blood supplies to women dying during childbirth because they couldn't store enough types of blood long enough in the clinics over 1,000 hills. So they said, why don't we use drones? And they created a centralized blood storage facility, and they would get an SMS message, and using one of these drones, which is the version 1 of these drones from Zipline, they would deliver the blood, round trip time 45 minutes, and in the initial pilot, they saved the lives of 1,000 women. But they couldn't scale because civil aviation rules got in the way. They couldn't fly drones because it interfered with the commercial flights. And also, flying drones had safety issues and data policy issues. The drones could collect data on agriculture and physical infrastructure and survey of the land, but they didn't have the data policy. Their civil aviation authority head told the president that he had to certify each drone one at a time. Well, as they do with airplanes. There's a new airplane model every 10 years, but there's a new drone model every 10 days. So they couldn't keep up with it. So that's why Rwanda partnered with us early on, and in 5 months, our drone team of 2 people working with the fellows on the ground and with us in San Francisco, in 5 months we crafted the first and at the time only performance-based drone regulatory framework, which went into effect. It's now been adopted across 12 African countries. We're taking it to India, and FAA recently published a recommendation based on the work that we did in Rwanda. The result, Rwanda became the first country to achieve 0 loss rate in blood delivery. They have the largest civilian network of, civilian drones. All of the technicians are Rwanda citizens. They don't need to go to college. They can be trained very, very quickly. And it has become the drone capital of the world. Carnegie Mellon is opening a campus in Kigali. And the next frontier for this landlocked, small East African country is artificial intelligence. So it represents huge opportunities for developed and undeveloped nations as well. When we look at artificial intelligence, there are 3 fundamental questions. Number 1, data. People say data is the oil, the new oil. We would like to think it's more mission critical, so we refer to it as the oxygen for the 4th Industrial Revolution. The questions about who owns the data, what can you do with it, and who gets paid are critical questions. Right now, data is in the hands of 5 to 10 platform companies. The term that I had heard being used about them is data oligarchs. We're opening a center in Russia as well, and I used that term, and they smiled. And their valuations are hundreds of billions of dollars and exceeding some of the GDPs of many nations. And we're now seeing a backlash from the government saying that, hang on a second, you can collect the data, but you cannot take it out of our country. Or if you take it out of our country, you have to apply our own rules as the European Union did with General Data Protection Regulation. Well, if you want to solve or accelerate the cure for a rare disease or different types of cancer, we need to collaborate around the world and put our different data sets together. And if we do that and put it under a machine learning engine, we may be able to accelerate the cure for some of these rare diseases. But that requires a forward-looking data policy, which is one of the areas we're working on. So our approach is, and this was actually inspired by one of our advisory board members, will.i.am, the musician. Nancy Brown, the CEO of American Heart Association, is also a member of our advisory board. So we have a very fun and intellectually stimulating board discussion when they're together. will.i.am said, anytime somebody uses my music, I get residual value out of it. I get paid. Why can't we do the same for data? So what we said was, what if we keep the data where it's collected, at the edge? Let the owners decide what it can be used for. So if somebody wants to use my genetic data, I can say, anyone who wants to use it for cancer research, you can use it free of charge. I don't want to get paid. But if it's for commercial purposes, ask for my consent. Actually, we can program this on the data set itself using blockchain smart contracts. So we can enforce actually what's permitted when the data travels. When somebody launches a cancer research application, it has to be certified by a body. It could be a cancer research association, or it could be the government. It says, I'm looking for this type of data. Data gets notified. It's already provisioned. It makes itself available with this smart contract, so we can enforce the limitation. But if it's for commercial purposes, the data will notify the owner. It says, somebody's wanting to use your data for this purpose. Are you willing to provide it? And I can say yes for 6 months, and I want to get paid. The question is, how do we value data, which itself does not have inherent value? How many of you had a cup of coffee this morning? Okay, I can't see it, but I assume it's a lot. Now I can see some of that. So we pay $1, $5, $3 for a cup of coffee. But when you look at coffee beans, they don't have dollar signs associated with them. Somehow the price gets set, and that mechanism is called a commodity exchange. And we said, can we create a marketplace for data and treat it like a commodity? Technically, that means that the governments decide data is a commodity, much like coffee beans or soybeans or tea. And it does not have to be, a commodity does not have to be a physical asset. It could be carbon emissions. So the legal structure is in place. But we cannot put data into a marketplace because of volume and privacy. You heard previously that there's a lot of data being generated, and we don't want to put everybody's data. And we said, can we put a reference to the data, a proxy? And this is where tokens came in from blockchain platforms. So the idea is for a government to create a token system, and we create a token exchange as a proxy for the value of the data. So anytime somebody wants to use my data with my consent, I get notified, I get paid, and the finance ministry or the treasury can tax it at the moment of transaction. As you can imagine, the finance people are really, really loving this idea, but it also allows us to get the residual value out of our data. This handles privacy, it handles equity, and it also handles security and allows cross-border data flow collaborations. This is already in the works with Japan, which is, as you know, the pioneering aging society. And my colleague Chizuru Sugo will be talking about this at 4 p.m. today at the Health Innovation area near Hartap. So you can really get into the details of what we're doing in Japan. And we'll be publishing our initial findings in January. And Japan, I think, is setting the tone for the rest of the world, not only in using this mechanism domestically to address late-stage brain diseases and lifestyle issues associated with dementia, but also cross-border collaboration when they called for flexible flow of data. The second question that's in the middle is ethics. How do we ensure that these algorithms are ethical, and whose ethics are we going to follow? Is it American ethics? Is it Saudi ethics? Is it Chinese ethics? Is it Russia? Is it Brazil? Is it Mexico? We can agree on the principle, but how do we activate that? Much like the music industry we were inspired with on the exchange idea, we said, are there technologies that are inherently dangerous but are being used safely? And that's electricity. If you look at the evolution of electricity in late 19th, early 20th century, it was adopted by the American factories to replace steam engines, and it caused all kinds of fires. The insurance companies got fed up, and they said, how can we prevent the fires caused by electricity? I'm sure they thought about banning electricity, but it didn't work out, as we see. Then they said, how do we make it safer? They discovered an already existing technology called circuit breaker, invented by Thomas Edison, and they created a captive institution called Underwriter Laboratories, and they told the factory owners that if you do not use UL-certified circuit breakers, we're not going to insure you. So one of our initiatives is to create Internet of Ethical Devices by embedding ethics rules as defined by each country. So when an internal or external instruction gets to this thing, whether it's a big thing like a car or a drone or a small one like an embedded device, it says, no, it's against the rules or ethics rules of my jurisdiction, and I'm not going to do it. Technically, it's possible. It's downloadable instruction sets, as we do with our smartphones every day. And we can use smart contracts under blockchain to define these rules. Governments are happy because they can ensure that they minimize harmful behavior by these things. Manufacturers love it because they don't have to deal with 134 different regulatory frameworks and be penalized. And insurance companies love it because they can minimize harm and reduce rate risk. So this is in the interest of everyone, and if we can do that, then we can ensure that the fourth industrial revolution benefits everyone, not just a few. And finally, the third question is access. Who gets access to all of this? As I mentioned earlier, is it just a few? And how do we ensure that the rest of the society benefits from that? And that's why it is very, very important to have civil society organizations like the American Heart Association, like International Trade Union Confederation that has 250 million unionized workers, to be working with us on a global level, on a multi-stakeholder basis, on an accelerated basis to address these opportunities and the challenges that we have. If we can do that, we can reduce energy consumption. If we can do that, we can reduce congestion. If we can do that, we can improve agriculture yields. And if we can do that, one day we may be able to accelerate the cure for some of the most intractable diseases we have. So the idea is to make sure that the fourth industrial revolution technologies are ethical, equitable, and just. I would like to briefly talk about the technologies we're working on. Blockchain, it embeds trust and transparency into the system. We're working with the Colombian government in Medellin in government procurement of school meals to ensure that it's built in. Internet of Things and smart cities allow us to collect the data that I talked about. Data policy is the core operating system for all of that. It's the binding tissue. And we need to create global interoperable data protocols. We're working with 27 countries in this endeavor, and they're all very willing to implement this. AI and machine learning, I talked about there's ethical issues, but also use of AI in private sector companies in terms of who owns intellectual property and the risk mitigation. And at the top, you see the implementations in drones, autonomous vehicles, environment, precision medicine, and digital trade. With that, I'd like to conclude my remarks and invite all of you to join us in our quest for ensuring that the fourth industrial revolution benefits everyone and not just a few. Thank you very much.